I don't understand what it's like to watch a game that I love and not relate to anybody who's playing it. So this comes from commentary or anything. And one of my participants said one of the great quotes to me, you know, when you're doing an interview and you just get a great quote. And she said, when I was a kid and I was in the backyard playing footy, I would imagine myself playing for Essendon, but I would imagine myself playing for the men's team. I couldn't even process in my mind that I would be playing for girls.
That was the voice of Paul Bowell, the guest on this episode of The Knowledge Mill. I'm your host, Greg Yoakum. Paul is a PhD candidate within the Sports Innovation Research Group at Swinburne University of Technology. Paul's research project seeks to understand how women Australian rules footballers affectively experience digital self-tracking and what impacts these interactions have on the player's construction of selfhood, identity-making, and body as athletes. With these insights, he aims to develop a framework that empowers women footballers to maximize their performance through digital self-tracking, while promoting positive self-image and women athletes' identity. Paul obtained a Bachelor of Arts with honours specialising in sociology from the Australian National University. Paul's honours project, in which he achieved first-class honours, investigated the compliance processes of employees who were digitally self-tracked in their workplace. As an undergraduate, Paul was awarded a new Colombo Plan scholarship that allowed him to participate in an ethnographic field school in the Western Highlands of Papua New Guinea. During the ethnographic field school in Papua New Guinea, Paul conducted fieldwork activities including interviews, survey taking, and social and participant observations focused on the social restrictions of cash cropping. Paul has also worked at Deakin and Trobe universities lecturing and tutoring first and second year undergraduate sociology and sport management units. Paul is also a board member for the Sports Innovation Research Group Advisory Board, a position he has held since May 2022. Paul and I spoke after the first day of the 2022 conference of the Sport Management Association of Australia and New Zealand, aka SMANZ. I had only met Paul that same day, and yet we easily fell into a wide-ranging conversation about his academic journey and women's sport. 2 days later, Paul won the 2022 SMANZ 3-Minute Thesis Award. Did our chat spur him to victory? Some things are not for us to know. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded on November 30th, 2022 on the campus of Swinburne University of Technology during the 28th Annual SMANZ Conference. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Paul and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 3. That's episode and the numeral 3. Hello, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, Greg. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for being a part of this. We are here at the SMANZ Conference, Sport Management Association of Australia and New Zealand, on the campus of Swinburne in Melbourne, sitting down to have a chat about your PhD. And as we always do, I'd like to start just by hearing from you. How did you find yourself doing a PhD?
Oh, it's a long story, a long journey. But well, first off, I'll tell you what my PhD study is, because I'll probably reference that. So I'm in the third year, so I'm probably about 10 months away from submitting. So my background is I'm a sociologist. So I'm looking at sort of sports sociology, and I'm interested in what's called like the datification of society, so how people interact with different technologies. And my particular study is I'm looking at AFLW women, so Australian Football League, Australian Rules Football women, and their interactions with digital self-tracking, so things like Fitbits, GPS trackers, Apple Watches, and how they experience using those. So I don't really care about how many steps they do or what data they generate, just how they experience it, and then that experience, how that they see themselves and their body. So that's my study. So my background is really different. So I'm not an academic as such. Like, I left school when I was 16 and I'm actually a qualified chef.
Oh, right.
And I worked as a chef for 24 years. So I love cooking. If I could cook every day for the rest of my life, it'd be great. But it's not a great profession.
Oh, okay.
It's a really hard profession. So after I grew up in Melbourne, and then I moved to Cairns, and I lived in Cairns for about 15 years. So a lot of the issues that we have at the moment around staff shortage and skill shortage, they were issues long before the pandemic. And working in a place like Cairns, which is a regional part of North Queensland, really difficult to get people to work in those industries. So I found I was running kitchens up there, and it's just being a chef, it's a very procedural job in which you just do the same process over and over again. And you just end up employing this different people every 6 months. You get a lot of tourists who come and like they're backpackers who work for 6 months. So I found that aspect of it really difficult, and then also just health reasons, like you're working 60 hours a week, and I hurt my knee. So I wanted to change professions, but I had no idea about like what to do or anything like that, and I wasn't academically inclined. I didn't like school. I left school when I was 16, and I was this is going to be tangential at the start, but I'll get back to my research now. Is that when I was at school, I was sort of pigeonholed as having a learning difficulty. I just basically was told by all my teachers that I wasn't very good at reading, I wasn't very good at spelling. So I just believed that. So I left school when I was 16, I got a trade, and I pretty much for the next 20 years of my life, I just disengaged from any sort of reading or writing because I believed that I couldn't do it. And it's a sort of a discourse that sort of everybody in my life sort of just had, and it was just a fact about me that was the case. And it wasn't till I was thinking, so this is back about 2013, 14, I was thinking about changing professions, and my partner, who's now my wife, she was at university as a mature age student, so she was about 26, 27, and she was doing an urban planning degree. And I met Brianna, and she was really supportive. I said, oh, look, I really want to stop chefing, I want to try something different. She said, have you thought about doing uni? And I was like, I can't do uni. People at uni are really smart. I'm not smart. And she was really supportive. And what I did is I looked at doing a diploma of higher education, which is it's a bridging course that you can do for 1 year, and it's a standalone degree. I was in Cairns at that time, so I went to James Cook University. And the diploma it's equivalent of, I think it's 8 undergraduate subjects, and they becomes a standalone degree, but then you can also do it if, say, you're lacking a Maths B or an English to get into a bachelor degree. You can do the diploma and then transfer across and get credits. So Brianna was really supportive in me doing that. So I enrolled and got into the diploma. I chose social science just as a stream. I had no real interest of what I was going to do. I thought I might do a double degree in business and arts, because I thought if I get a business degree, I could go back into the hospitality industry and work, say, as a general manager. And then one bit of advice I could give to anyone is, if you're going to do any sort of undergraduate or definitely a PhD, you have to do something that you're really passionate about.
Absolutely. And
I read all the core subjects for the business courses, and I couldn't imagine doing any of those. So I just chose to do basically an arts degree. So I did the first 6 months, and I absolutely loved it. And I remember the first day of like a lecture, I walked in and the lecture was just amazing, and I went home and I said to my wife, I think I want to be a lecturer, like a university lecturer.
All right.
And it was the first time in my life, like, it was just such a far out thing to say, because like I was just starting a diploma of higher education. I didn't even know if I could write an essay, let alone complete a PhD to be a university lecturer. And she's like, oh, that's such a great idea, you should definitely do that. So I really took to the study really well. Being a mature age student, I treated it like a job. I'll rock up to the library at 8:30 in the morning and leave at like 6 o'clock at night. And 6 months into the diploma, the staff there said, look, we really think you should transfer into a Bachelor of Arts. And I transferred into a Bachelor of Arts and did that. And then about 18 months at James Cook, my wife, she completed her undergraduate, and then she got a job with the federal government in Canberra. And then I was able to transfer to the ANU, and I finished my undergraduate at the ANU. So, and then I did honours at ANU, and that was where I sort of went down with arts. You when you're doing an undergraduate, you dabble in a lot of things. So I was sort of looking at a little bit of anthropology. I was looking at the ANU. They have a really good School of Pacific Studies. So I was quite interested there. I actually went to PNG and did an ethnographic field school.
Yeah, right.
So I was sort of interested in that, but at that time I was about 37, 38, and if I did like a PhD in sort of Pacific Studies, it would probably mean 11 or 12 months of ethnographic work in the Pacific Islands. So I came across this sociologist, Associate Professor Gavin Smith at ANU, and his sort of expertise is around surveillance, criminology, and this sort of datification, looking at CCTV cameras, and he was getting into these self-tracking devices. So Gavin sort of took me under his wing, and this is sort of really probably relevant to being at the conference. It's really great to sort of network with academics, and I volunteered with Gavin and just did research, RA work, research assistant work with Gavin for about 12 months, just reading papers, writing up abstracts, putting together literature reviews, like all for free, but really valuable sort of information. And then Gavin was my honours supervisor, and I did my honours looking at employees' experiences of digital self-tracking. So things like, the Domino's cars that drive around and they've got the sign on top of the Domino's car. So that's actually plugged into the cigarette lighter, and that will track the position of the car.
Okay.
And goes to the store, but also goes to the customer. But then that also will track the speed of the car and goes back to the store. So I spoke to employees around those sort of conditions and how that sort of tracking made them feel in their job and things like that. And then, as I was coming to the end of my honours, Melbourne was calling us home, and I wanted to do a PhD, and I started to apply for universities in Melbourne, and I came across Swinburne, and I knew I needed to find a topic, and I wanted to keep on going in the tracking sort of aspect. And my other love in life is sport. So I love sport. So it was probably, I think it was 2018, the Women's World Cup of Football was on, and I wouldn't say it was an epiphany, but it was like 2:00 at night, and I was watching, I think it was Australia was playing France or something like that. And I had this idea. I was watching at the time Ali Carpenter, who's Australia's right back. She's been in the Matildas setup since she was 15. At the time, she was about 17 or 18. And she was playing with a striker, Lisa Devannon, who was coming to the end of her career. She was about 35. And I was sitting there thinking, because I was trying to think of a topic for my PhD. And I thought to myself, because the Matildas have gone through a very rapid change of professionalisation, in which Ali Carpenter, who being like 15, coming into that, her experience of the Matildas would have been far different than Lisa Devannon, who 15 years ago playing for the Matildas was far less professionalised. And it got me thinking, what would it be like for both Ali and Lisa with their experiences with, say, digital self-tracking? Because Ali Carpenter has been in a lead environment her whole life, and she would probably take to that sort of devices much quicker than, say, what Lisa would. So from that sort of moment, it got me sort of thinking about developing my study. And then, I put together an application, and I was lucky enough to get a scholarship at Swinburne, and came back to Melbourne at the start of 2020 and started now, which I'm just about ready to pass. So, I think I'm the prototype that has debunked the theory that you have to be smart to get into academia and do a PhD. It's very much a holistic skill set. And the thing I found about getting back to what I was saying about this narrative that I sort of grew up having this learning disorder, it's sort of come a full circle now, because sort of in my theorising of my thesis, I'm very much looking at the ways in which discourses, so sort of non-human things sort of clash with people. So when I'm talking about like the technology itself, so if your Apple Watch tells you to stand up, you're having an interaction with a non-human thing. But I'm also really interested in the way in which like culture and society and the discourses we have. So particularly in my space, the cultural thinking about masculinity in sport, and how that impacts women's participation and what the wider society believes women can and can't do within a sporting context, and especially looking at these emerging sports like Australian rules football, and these discourses are really pervasive, and I've really sort of lived through that, this discourse of you've got a learning difficulty, you can't really read, you can't really write, and it becomes very, it becomes truth, and it becomes true to you.
Yeah.
And it's something which I've completely debunked, is that, if you're not, if you feel like you haven't got that skill, like it's something which you need to engage in. And I just found through constant reading, constant writing, like the more reading I did, the better my vocabulary got, the better my writing got.
Yep.
And it's just like learning how to play a musical instrument. And that's something where I've sort of found like I've come this full circle now, is understanding through my sort of sociological lens, like the process that I went through to sort of disengage from sort of that to now. I always describe it as like I went through this like enlightenment of like knowledge, like now I could just spend the rest of my life learning. And I think that's the thing that I'm sort of enjoying the most, is just constantly learning.
Yeah. That's all really interesting, because I think there's an identity component to it as well, that you maybe see yourself as academic or you don't see yourself as academic. Or maybe I should rephrase that and say you see yourself as not academic. And if you do internalize that, I think it's, I had a similar experience in my undergrad. I was a very average undergrad student. And I remember I have a very specific memory one night when I was, and this was back in the early noughts, and so to check my homework assignments for chemistry I was taking at the time, I had to physically go to the chemistry building and look at the printed answer guide that was up on a bulletin board behind some glass. And I was down there late one night. I'd just done a homework assignment with a friend of mine, and it was just the two of us down there, except for way down the end of the corridor there was someone else. And the way that the building was laid out is I was there for Chemistry 101, down one end of the hall, and the further you went down the hall, the more advanced the chemistry got. And this person was all the way down the end, and they were there and they were looking at their answer guide. And I remember having the thought, I wish I was that academic. And it was only in recent years that I was telling that story to someone else, and my wife has heard that story many times. And she finally just said to me, "But Greg, you were also there looking at the answers."
Yeah.
you only saw the other person because you were doing the same thing.
Yeah, and it's really helped me. Like I teach now, so I've been teaching the last 18 months at Deakin University and Trobe University, and it really helps me with my approach with my undergraduates. And sort of, I did it when I was an undergraduate as well. I did a lot of student support help as well, and it's the two things I'm passionate about. Like I'm really passionate about my research, like sociology. I could just talk about sociology all day, and the research, and especially researching. I know you've got the same interest, but researching in women's sport and really sort of forwarding that. But I'm also really passionate about university and about creating opportunities. My nephew has just gone through VCE. He's just finished his VCE, and talking to my brother and the discourses that are still around going to university or finishing year 12 for these students is still very much around, you're either going to get an enter or you're not going to get an enter. You're going to go to university, you're not going to go to university. And I find that very limiting. And there shouldn't be these limitations placed on young people. There should be more of a framing of, okay, university might not be for you now. Right. But it's something which you can come to. Like my wife, she was a mature age student. She was very academically inclined at school, and then she came out. She grew up in the country, so she moved to Melbourne. She had a lot of different factors which were hard. But straight out of school, she went to university, and she didn't have a very good experience, and she ended up leaving her undergraduate before the first year was finished. But now she's, as a mature age student, she had time in industry. She worked in different industries. She was a real estate consultant for a high Melbourne firm. And then she's become an urban planner, and now she just finished her Masters in Urban Planning, while she's also worked for the Australian government and now the Victorian government. And I just sort of look at someone like her and think like, if you just stamp the papers and say she's not good at university at 18, like, it's too constricting, and especially now with the rate of technological change that we have. Like talking about my nephew and thinking about what does he want to do for the future. Like there's going to be whole industries in renewable energy and that don't even exist now.
Yeah.
That he's going to work in. Like my brother works in the automobile industry, and like he was a mechanic and now he's more in the management side, but that whole industry is going to completely change, in which you're going to have people that are going to have to service electrical cars and things like that. So to put limitations on a person at a particular age and saying they can or can't go to university. So I'm really passionate about just helping anyone.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate. I've done a lot of work at Deakin University, and I've been able to go down to their Geelong campus, and that's something I really enjoy. The Warm Ponds campus has a lot of first generation students who are going to university, and I really enjoy that sort of interaction and breaking some of the myths. I think a lot of people come to universities and they think there's a whole lot of these closed rooms where people sit around and argue about using an Oxford comma or not.
Yeah.
But like, it's the most supportive place. I've worked and studied in about 5 universities, and they're the most supportive places that are there to help you. But it's independent learning. You have to seek out the help, and you have to know where to find the help.
Yeah, that's right. And going back to, because I would agree with, I've been working as a tutor first and now a lecturer in an Australian uni for 8 years, and it's very different to the American uni system, but different in all the ways that you're speaking to, that there's more opportunities, that it's a bit more, I don't know if egalitarian is the right word, but it just, a fair go for anyone who wants to have a crack.
Yep.
And there are those opportunities to, if you don't have the HSC scores or whatever you need to do the thing you want to do, there are still pathways. But as you say, if you're told this is not for you, you'll never be that, you might as well do this. And when you're young and impressionable, that can really stick. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, most definitely. So I'm sort of this, as I'm sort of becoming to the end of my PhD, I'm really sort of, I see myself like I want to continue on and be that university lecturer. And I definitely want to keep on researching and working in sociology, but I do see also myself sort of opportunities. I could see myself working in like student engagement or student support, academic support, or those sort of areas as well. I'm really passionate about both of those fields, which I'm really open to as well. I love. We just had a workshop there, and we talked about early career researchers just saying, we love teaching, but it is something which I really enjoy doing as well.
Yeah, and it's when you're working casually in your PhD, sometimes it has to go on the back burner. I could find that really frustrating.
Yeah.
When I was doing my PhD, I felt like if I could just run this subject, I know there's things that I would do a certain way, not because this idea is bad, but because I've got this other thought I want to try. And if you have your experience that you're bringing to it to try to help similar students, I think that could feel really limiting.
I find teaching for me has been really enriching. I had some really good advice from a colleague, and we're talking about sort of managing, because there's so many different competing interests when you're doing a PhD. Like if you just could sit there and just do your dissertation without having to fulfill your publications, your speaking engagements, your teaching and getting your networks up,
everything to get the job.
Exactly. But Kat gave me this advice of whatever you do in regards to teaching or anything that you say yes to, papers, collaborations, try and have it some way where it can advance your PhD. And it can add interest in your PhD. It could be a paragraph in a lit review. It could be help forming. And I've been really lucky with the subjects that I've taught. I've taught like a sports sociology subject at Deakin. I've taught introduction to sociology at Deakin. I've taught sports management at La Trobe. They've really cemented my thinking, my theoretical sort of grounding of where my PhD is going. And I've sort of had a stagnated PhD. I started it at 2020, February 2020. So I came into the university at Swinburne. I just moved from Canberra. Life was great. Moved in with my mum for a month, and then we're going to go rent a house. And then a year and a half later, we're still in lockdown.
Yeah. It was especially bad in Melbourne, wasn't it? All the lockdowns.
Yeah. So we had, I think it was about 8 months of 2020 we were in lockdown. So I started the PhD then, and that was actually good. That was good for me. Not good for the lockdown, but for the work, because it was just the first year you're just in the literature, you're just reading, and I just got to spend like 10 hours a day at home just reading and that. But then, getting into 2021, then I had to start doing data collection, and that was where it just all became very hard with the AFLW players that I was dealing with. The AFLWs had just the most turbulent 12 months, partly due to COVID, but partly due to the emergent nature of the sport. So I started then, so everything was going fine. The first 18 months was going fine. I didn't really worry about COVID at all. And then I started doing my data collection about August, and it just became really clear really quickly that it was going to be difficult. So just the nature of the players, we thought we would just, because we're sort of club agnostic in the study, so we thought we'd just approach players, but it became clear with the power imbalance of the AFLW players compared to their clubs, it would be better to go through the clubs. So we sort of contacted the clubs, and we got some good uptake from about half a dozen clubs. But because of the contractual arrangements with AFLW players in the clubs, because they're only part-time, the clubs can't sort of interact and contract with the players until they're at the club. And then the season got cancelled for a month, so then the players didn't come back to the club from September to October, so then data collection got put off, and then started doing a little bit, and then just at the end of 2021, the season started, and that's when I think it was the Omicron wave just absolutely went crazy. So then the players become very insular in what they're doing, because AFLW players are part-time athletes. Most of them have jobs outside, so the ramifications of them getting COVID was quite significant. It's a short season, so if you miss 2 games, you've missed nearly a third of the season or a quarter of the season. You then can't fulfil your employment at the job, which is giving you the money. So they were very hesitant in doing that. And then just halfway through the summer season, the AFL sort of floated the idea of then changing the start of the next season or bringing it forward from January 2023 to August this year, 2022. So then the players needed to go and have a break. And so I ended up, data collection was supposed to start in September 2022 and finish in February 2020. Start in September 2021 and finish in February 2022. And then it got to July. I just stopped it at July this year. Right. So it took nearly 12 months. So in that time, there was a lot of downtime, a lot of time where I couldn't really do anything. Like I'd already written the first half, like the front half, and there was no point going back and changing anything or really reworking anything until you start to find out, how your results are coming out and things like that. So the teaching was a really good, not distraction, but it was able for me to do something which was benefiting my development. But then, and at the time, I think a lot of PhD candidates have this, you feel almost guilty, like you're spending hours marking, you're spending hours doing other things, and then you look at the end of the week and you're like, I've done nothing on the PhD this week. But for me, being strategic about what I was doing, because when you're teaching sociology, especially introduction to sociology and sports sociology, you're only like 2 steps away from talking about gender or race. So gender is very much, especially in a sports sociology lens, it's very much based around a lot of what you're talking about, and it really helped me sort of solidify a lot of the groundings of what I wanted to do. So I think that's something which I could probably say to people that are thinking about doing a PhD or they're just about embarking on it is don't discount these extra things that you do. Is just think of them as tick boxing to get your personal development up there. They're things that you can, if you strategically think about what you're doing, they can enhance your work and really sort of round your work out. And I've found that I've been really lucky in what I've been able to do with that.
I would agree with everything that you're saying. I was also very lucky to be able to, my PhD was design thinking in sport, and I was also able to not only teach a design thinking subject that we call Innovation Lab at UTS, but also to do sports sociology units, sport and society, those kind of things. And it was just the perfect wheelhouse to always have my brain in. So yeah, even if I'm not, I'm sitting there reading 80 essays or whatever, and it's not to do with any talk, maybe it's about sweatshops in sport equipment manufacturing. So it doesn't enter into my thesis at all, but just to be amongst those similar ideas, and as well to be, I found the manifest curiosity of my students to be just continually motivating and exhilarating.
And like, it's one thing to just sit there and just read and immerse yourself in things, but when you're actually having to 6 times a week for 50 minutes talk about an issue with young like engaged minds, and then sort of bounce off the ideas of what they're saying and try and guide them to a particular point that you're trying to make, but then sort of see where they're at. And sociology is a really great subject to teach, but it's a difficult subject to teach because when you're teaching a science subject or you're teaching a business subject, there's ways to do things and ways not to do things, and people come to it as like, okay, you're going to tell me how to be an accountant sort of thing. But when you come to being a sociologist or learn sociology, like, everybody has a lived experience of their social world, and most of us take it for granted. And that's why there's a lot of inherently problematic issues in the world. So, like, in Australia, in particular aspects and particular lifestyles and particular places in Australia, like there's ingrained racist views which are part of people's like social construction of how they see the world. Right. So, and especially for my space of like women in sport, there's especially in that, there's particular gendered views which are socially constructed about the capabilities of women in sport, and this masculinity as being a particular aspect or a particular trait which is accustomed to particular sports, and if you are a feminine person like a woman, you cannot do those sports. So when you come to teach that and you challenge people on those sort of notions, and these are just matter of fact sort of things that people don't actually question. It sometimes can be really difficult, but it can be really rewarding also to sort of to have people have those moments and think, I haven't actually thought about that, or you've framed that in a different perspective, even just things very simple, and when you think about them, obvious things like gender marking of leagues, like the Big Bash League, for example. You have the Big Bash League, which is the men's competition, and then the Women's Big Bash League, which is, of course, the women's competition. But the fact that that one is gender marked and the men's is not, that's what I'm always talking to my students about. Like, what does this tell us about what this competition is? It's other, right? It has this different name. There's only gender distinctions made in the AFL when they're talking about women. So what does that mean? It means that the normalised AFL body and player is a man, and that when a woman enters that space, then there has to be a distinction made. Right. So they're obviously playing a different game because it's AFLW as opposed to AFL. So you're completely right, and it's what I sort of enjoy the most, I think, is really making that impression on students. And now with my work, like what I want to do with my PhD is really sort of get that out there. And I think it's really important, as we're here at SMANS, is thinking about the positionality of the researchers. So that was probably one of the things I had to think about the most, is I'm a middle-aged, white, cisgendered male. So really coming into a space of doing research with young women in women's sport is very challenging, but it's not insurmountable. And I think it's something which, especially looking at like sports management and sports sociology, there needs to be more of.
Yeah.
With my supervisor, Professor Emma Sherry here at Swinburne, and some other colleagues, Dr. Casey Simons and Dr. Aurelie Pankowick, we've written a paper which we're currently got under review at the moment, and we did a scoping review of all the articles written in the sports management literature for the past 20 years around women and girls.
Mm-hmm.
And we found about 8 or 9,000 articles. And after we did it, there was probably 400 articles left about women and girls. And it was really, what we found was actually really surprising in what was not there. It was really superficial. Most of the work is around participation,
mm-hmm.
and most of it is all around white heterosexual women, and they're really positioned as homogenous. We only found 40 papers that were based around like intersectionality, so looking at things like race, things like sexuality, gender, and things like that. So I think it's really important going forward that people like myself going into like the institutional academia, being a white male, really push that agenda of getting more people to research those sort of groups. Because the other thing we found is that the majority, and this has been done, people like Neff Walker, who's done a lot of work in America in sports management, the people that are researching these intersectional groups are from those groups.
Right.
So just a lot of women do a lot of women academics are doing feminine research. And I think that's really something which I think be good to challenge and get more people doing, because the fact remains is that the white male is the person that's setting the syllabus, that's setting the direction in the faculties, is heading up the supervisor panels and things like that, so they can set the agendas. So that's another thing I'm really passionate about, sort of coming to the end of my PhD, is seeing much more research and focus given to women's sport and intersectional research in that sort of sports sociology and sports management space.
Well, I think because allyship is important, speaking broadly about just feminism, full stop, one of the things that you need is allyship, male allies.
Yeah.
But I agree with what you're saying, because, as you said, I have a similar interest. I haven't necessarily researched in this area, but in my teaching and just my general being informed, this is an area of mine that I would like to move my research into. But in saying that, I know that I need to be very careful, because I'm a privileged person coming into this space, and that can be counterproductive or harmful if I'm not careful about how I do it.
Most definitely. So that's what I said at the start. It's really knowing your positionality and your position. So most definitely, like, I fully acknowledge that we're two white males here sitting around talking about doing research for women, and too often this is where like research on Indigenous Australians is really become problematic, because it's just as a country, we've just spent 200 years of making decisions for people without asking them. So most definitely, there definitely needs to be this allyship, this consultation. But I do think that too often it's gone the other way, especially in this sports management realm, where it's left to too few to do. And I'm talking more about like impactful research.
Yeah.
So, as I said, like what we found in the paper that we've written is that there's a focus on participation. So there's almost this belief that once women or girls start playing sport, it's fine. And I think that what I'm really sort of trying to get at is making this impactful research of like, well, what's the lived experience of these women and girls participating in sport? Is it? We see it in the AFLW. Like this year, one of the teams went up to Sydney to play a game, and it was at a suburban ground, and there was one toilet for the whole team. Right. And there was male and females.
Yeah, that's a problem around the country, isn't it?
So we've got a lack of infrastructure for women and girls at all levels of sport playing. So while it's great that we're trying to push agendas to get participation, and participation is really important, it's a superficial view. So looking at this more impactful sort of thing. So definitely, I think there's a mix. Like, we can't go the other way where there's just a whole group of men deciding what women do, because that's exactly what we've come through, the patriarchy. That's not right. But I do think that there's a scope for more people in academia to take an interest in these marginalised groups and look at these groups differently. I think that's more what I'm trying to say, is look at them differently. Yeah. There's this it's not an homogenous group that experiences everything the same, and we need to sort of take that into account. So and we have to do that. To be able to do that, we need the research and the understanding. Exactly. So yes, that's sort of what I'm sort of excited about as I'm coming now to sort of the pointy end of my thesis. So,
are you able to speak about your findings at all?
Yeah. So what I found is that so I did as I said at the start. So I'm looking at through what's called a vital materialist lens or a post-humanist lens, which is the way I'm framing the study. So basically, it's a more than human perspective. So I'm taking into consideration the non-human aspects of this tracking assemblage, as I'm calling it, of the way in which the players interact with their tracking. So taking that sort of perspective on, I'm looking at all the different aspects within the tracking that the player does. So how they interact with their watch, how they interact with their data, how they share the data, what the different discourses around the idea of, like, what is this socially and culturally expected to be a professional athlete. So things like using these performance monitoring tools are highly coveted in elite sport. So these social expectations are really quite pivotal in getting these players to engage in these tracking activities. But there's also this positioning around data in general, and technology in general, as being very objective. So we just look at data and we think that's what the data is. Data's highly subjective. So these footballers are a perfect example of that. So most of them are semi-professional. So some of them are landscape gardeners, some of them are paramedics, nurses, builders, labourers. There was one that I spoke to that was a wharf worker that would actually work night shift and come straight from the wharf, or go to football training, then go to the wharf and like do whatever there, like drive forklifts and things like that. So, but the thing is that this data is presented objectively. So there's no asterisk next to the footballer's name saying this footballer here worked a 12-hour nursing shift and then came to training. This is why their high-speed running's a little bit low. So what I found is that taking all these social and cultural discourses, along with the tracking technology itself, and taking into account the fitness staff, the coaches, the expectations of the AFL community, it makes a very, very vexing and very complicated experience for the footballers with this tracking technology. And what it tends to happen is the footballers have to self-manage these outcomes. So they get a lot of different. I use affect theory. So affects are like feelings, but affects are they're basically bodily impacts that you get from something. So if you get scared and you start getting this like your heart starts beating, your skin starts to crawl, like these are effects that happen corporally to your body, but then your mind recognises it after it's happened, and then that is processed through your mind as being a feeling. So effects aren't feelings, they're intensities that are felt through the body, and then the generation of that effect is the feeling that's in your mind. Right. So I'm using these different effects that are being generated through this digital self-tracking assemblage that the players have, and there's multitudes of these effects, and there's some positive ones and there's some negative ones. And this is the real vexing thing, is that the players can get really positive affirmation from doing this digital self-tracking, they can feel quite motivated. They can feel happy. Like I've had comments where it's just like you feel on top of the world when you smash out a really great session. But then conversely, when things aren't going well, when you're fatigued or when you haven't slept well, a lot of things around menstrual cycles. So if they're on their period and their fatigue is low and things like that, when their data's not good, it can be really detrimental and it can be really negative. And the lack of infrastructure around the knowledge and the support and the education means that the footballers have to sort this out themselves. They need to make sense of it. They need to self-manage the feelings, the effects that they have. And this just creates extra emotional and invisible labour. Yeah. And these are really busy people. Yeah. Like they're in an elite environment trying to play in the elite women competition for AFL. But then they're workers, as I said, they're sisters, mothers, partners, so on. So I'm coming up to sort of writing the discussion and that, but I sort of see that there's real room for a player-centered framework of practice in which there needs to be some sort of guidance. Education at the moment from the clubs, from the strength and conditioning coaches I spoke to, is very ad hoc. It's very based on, there's no time. Time is really poor. So it's also based around the contractual arrangements that they have. So you probably found this in your work with cricket, and it's probably something they've been dealing with as well. As you only get the players at the club for a very short period of time. Yeah. And they have to go and do all their gym work. They have to go and do their physical work. And then the coaches, the actual coaches want them on there playing with the footballs and things like that. But I see that as a real reactive way of looking at things. So these players are also, they're only at the moment playing a 10-round season. They're only contracted for 6 months. They only get a short window of pre-season. So there's probably 3-4 months of the year they're by themselves training. Yeah. So these digital tracking technologies can be really positive in that respect, but they're not given the tools, the infrastructure, the know-how to support this. So having some sort of a framework in which, a player-centered framework in which they can positively use that, because at the end of the day, what happens is that these technologies, if they're not harnessed right, they can have really negative impacts on how the players see themselves and their bodies. And we've got to be really careful. Like professional women athletes are one of the highest number of people in the world to have like body dissatisfaction issues. And you can get things like relative deficiency syndrome, which is related to either purposeful or deliberate underfueling of the body and then over-exercising. So it's quite common in long-distance runners. So Professor Holly Thorpe and Marianne Clark have done some really good work on that from about long-distance runners. And so it's really important that these digital self-tracking devices are sort of, I wouldn't say regulated, but there needs to be a level of expertise in this elite environment on how they're used. Or, there could be some, and not everyone's going to develop an eating disorder or become addicted to using these devices, but they have that potential. Yeah. But on the other end of the scale, they can I just have players that just said, just using this makes me feel shit. And it's just like, you don't want that. Yeah.
Should be helping, not
it should be really helping and motivating you to be the best athlete you can be. So that's sort of where the findings are coming out at the moment. So it's really exciting putting the sort of details together and bringing the story together, because there's some other issues around like wearability issues are another problem, which getting back to the gendered aspect. So the players comment a lot about the smartwatches are too big and heavy. They're not comfortable. The straps are way too big. And there's research around probably 70% of the designers and developers of these technologies are men. And it's quite clear that the design of these technologies are through a white heterosexual lens. So like things like a lot of these footballs are really small, so they get heart rate straps that just don't fit around their bodies, and then there's other issues like they have to wear a GPS with a GPS bra that then goes over the sports bra, and then they can connect a heart rate monitor to the GPS bra, but because they're already wearing a sports bra, the the heart rate monitor sits on the sports bra, not the skin. Okay. So then it impacts the accuracy. So these aspects are then reinscribing back onto the footballer that they don't belong in this space.
Right. That
the equipment that is made for these athletes is not functional for them.
Yeah.
And it's really, this is getting back to this vital materialist lens where the footballers they're reminded of this discourse that they're playing in a space that they're not.
Yeah.
It's Papua has had a really good concept of space invaders. So people that do not fulfill the somatic norm, so the bodily norm of a particular space, are invading it. So she did a lot of great research about UK politics and women coming into politics and just being complete space invaders in that space. And you see this in sport all the time. And the incident that happened with Taylor Harris a few years ago, where she had that picture of her kicking the ball and then was subjected to vile misogyny.
Yeah.
That's a classic example of a space invader, where a person who does not fulfill the somatic norm of a particular space has come into that space and they're reminded of it sharply.
Yeah.
And that's what the wearability issues are doing.
Can you just expand on that for someone who might not know what happened in that?
So Taylor Harris was, I think this was it was only the second season. It's about 2018, 19 it might have been. Channel 7 had a photo of her kicking a goal, and it was just basically a picture of a really athletic.
It's an iconic photo.
Yeah, Australian rules footballer just kicking a ball where she was in mid-kick and she was off the ground. And Channel 7 posted that up on their social media, and within hours it just was had hundreds and hundreds of vile misogynistic comments on it. And then Channel 7 decided to pull the photo down, and that probably made things worse. Mm-hmm. My colleague at Swinburne, Dr. Casey Simons, she's written. She does a lot of like journalistic writing, and I know Casey's written some really good stuff for The Guardian and that on it. And then what resulted from that was that Channel 7 actually then decided the next year that they just wouldn't post, or they wouldn't let any comments on anything that they posted for AFLW, which is not really fixing the problem.
Yeah.
But that to me is just this perfect example of this of AFLW footballers are space invaders into the game of Australian rules football, which is traditionally, culturally and socially in this country framed as a masculine game. And even on the weekend we just had the grand final, and it was the grounds were an issue. The I'm not here to defend the AFL at all, but the game was the competition was rushed and they didn't have the grounds, and Brisbane ended up getting the qualification, and they couldn't access the Gabba or the Metricon Stadium at the Gold Coast, so they played it at Springfield, which is a brand new oval, never been used before, and they could only have 10,000 people. And all over social media there was comments from like, why are we bothering with a game where there's only 10,000 people going to the grand final? And that just really gets me frustrated. And there's comments like we just had 4 new expansion teams come into the AFLW, and we had some games where there was like 5 or 10 goals to 1 point. And we just have to remember that this is a new competition. It's season 7.
Yeah.
And go back, I think it was in 1901 when the AFL or the VFL then was only 4 or 5 years old, and Geelong kicked 150 points to St Kilda's 1 point.
Right.
So in the AFLM, there's been a lot of bad games and there's been a lot of bad teams. And they've had 125 years to sort it out, and billions of dollars of investment. So and cricket, your space where you've done your research, like they're so far ahead. But cricket was the same. Like 15 years ago, women's cricket did not resemble what it does now. Yeah. And the investment. I know Sarah Stiles, who's she's the CEO of Change Our Game. She worked at the Australian Cricket Board and put a lot of work into that, into sort of advancing cricket, women's cricket, and sort of in women's sport, like cricket is one of the real like success stories, and you can sort of see where the AFLW can go to looking at cricket. But you got to remember, cricket's had a 10 or 15 year head start.
Yeah, and I think this might be anecdotal. I'm not sure where this came from, this knowledge of mine. So it may not even be knowledge, but it was told to me at some point that the AFL was meant to launch the AFLW 2 or 3 years later than they actually did, and they moved that up because the WBBL got off to such a red-hot start that they just wanted to move as quick as they could.
Yeah, so that's exactly right, and it's probably thankful that they did, because it was scheduled to start at 2020, so it probably wouldn't have started now because of COVID.
Of course, yeah.
So they started at 2017, and it's been a great thing, and the data shows that the participation of young girls playing football for the last 10 years has gone exponentially, but since the AFLW, it's like 300-400 times. It's just gone crazy, the number of girls, and it's just fantastic. And like when I spoke to my participants, like I generally start off with some ice-breaking questions about, you know, what does sport mean to you, and the reason why I'm so passionate about women's sport is this idea of like, I don't understand what it's like to watch a game that I love and not relate to anybody who's playing it. So this comes from commentary or anything. And one of my participants said one of the great quotes to me, you know, when you're doing an interview and you just get a great quote. And she said, when I was a kid and I was in the backyard playing footy, I would imagine myself playing for Essendon, but I would imagine myself playing for the men's team. I couldn't even process in my mind that I would be playing for girls. Yeah. And young girls now don't have to worry about that. They can see Madison Prabakis, they can see Daisy Pearce running around, and I think that was what got me into researching women's sport. I was living in Canberra and I went and saw a women's A-League match, and I just got to see all these young 6, 7, 8-year-old girls with like Ali Carpenter and Kira Simon's shirts just sitting on the sidelines, and just thinking, like, my sister's like 37, 38 and she loves sport. And like, she never got to see that when she was a young girl, and I think that's the most exciting thing, and it's something which I'm really like. We've got a great community here at Swinburne with Professor Emma Sherry and Dr. Casey Simons are really big advocates in the women's sport space, and it can get really negative at times. It can get really depressing, as I said, like on the weekend, the AFLW Grand Final, when you just see some of the comments, but I sort of try to stay positive at times and just think about, wow, you know, like 5 or 6 years ago, there was no AFLW. Like the women's game of rugby league is really doing great stuff. And we have Tracy Taylor, who's presenting here. She's done some really excellent work in the women's rugby league space about professionalisation. And you have a look. We're hosting the Women's World Cup, this year, and we'll. You know, the Matildas are one of the best teams in the world. Yeah. You know, you get to see the American women's team. It's just, they're on par with any other team in the world, male or female. Cricket as well. Before the pandemic, we had 87,000 for the final.
That was the last time I got to do something cool before the pandemic.
Yeah. So like, thinking about like 5 years ago, like to have a women's cricket match at the MCG and have 87,000 people. Yeah. The second biggest crowd for a women's sporting match ever. Yeah, and you look over in Europe, and I know like Barcelona and Real Madrid have had like 91,000 people going to their Champions League matches. The record has been broken since, So there is some really good inertia happening in this space, so I just try to stay positive. Well, I think if you take a long view, because like you're saying, it's a similar thought that I've had in the past as well, where when people, especially students of mine, because this is a debate that we have in subjects like sport and society, where if you want to talk about the number of AFLW clubs, for example, and then the talent pool, the player pool that you have available to draw from, you're getting down into true amateurs that have never actually had proper professional strength and conditioning and dietitians and all of this. But if you don't create the capacity for the player pool to grow to, then it will never grow. You're certainly right. So in talking about AFL, so Australian rules, so in 2002, I think it was, before 2002, it was illegal for girls over the age of 12 to play with boys. So basically, and then there was 3 girls that took their club and Victoria Football to court, anti-discrimination court, saying it was discriminatory, and they were ruled in their favour, and then that was the start of increasing number of girls, because the authorities didn't want girls playing with boys after the age of 12, so they had to give them a team. Mm-hmm. So there's only been a generation of that development pathways through. Yeah. And we're seeing it now with like Madison Prabakis and Georgie Prabakis, who have come through that development pathways, and they're elite AFLW footballers now. So there needs to be another generation of those, because we just had the AFLM draft last night, and there's 17, 18-year-old kids that are being drafted, mm-hmm. and these are kids that mainly from private schools that from the age of 14 or 15 have been in like representative sport. Yeah. And I had one of my participants say to me, the men have like, they're just been told they're going to be an AFL footballer. They're experiencing elite environment competitions. Some of the players get to go and train with some of the AFL clubs. They have affiliates where the girls don't get that. And even some of the development, like the under-18s girls teams, with things like the GPS trackers, the strength and conditioning coaches said, look, they've only got 1 or 2, and that's if the boys aren't using them, and they're not useful with the data that they're producing. So they're getting into these systems and they're not having any experience, and they're not really seeing. And then on the flip side of that, like once you're in the system, it's like, what are you going to do? Like you might play for 4 or 5 years, you might enjoy it, but is that going to be a real job for you? Are you going to have any sort of, is there any career paths past playing AFLW? Yeah. Like if you're an AFLM player, you know, there's media possibilities, there's sports like management roles of talent. You can go off into many different things, and then there's also the corporate capacity of these clubs for AFLM to get you into particular jobs where AFLW, like Daisy Pearce and Abby Holmes, are unicorns compared to everyone else, and coaching as well. Like I'm sure we're going to see lots of papers here this week about the lack of like women access into coaching. So there's definitely there needs to be this pathway. And getting back to Tracy Taylor, she's done a lot of great work about professionalisation and professionalisation in sport. It's a trajectory. In women's sport, and they're on a trajectory in, like, as I said, all women's sports, and cricket's further up their trajectory, AFLW's at the start, and you just need to give it time, but you also need to give it support and infrastructure. Yeah, and I think that's really, really important that we give it that time to breathe, and I think we need to be really mindful of the criticism that we give. We can't look at everything through the prism of male sport. Mm-hmm. So if you criticise a player, or you criticise a team, or you criticise a sport, if you do that in AFLM, it's fine. Yeah. Next week, people are still going to watch the game. People are still going to turn up.
Yeah. It's banter.
Exactly. But if you criticise, like I think it was the start of this year, or it could have been last year, there was real criticism about the way Meg Lanning handled the one-off test match in her captaincy. Mm-hmm. And it came from a sports station here in Melbourne. And there was no context given to the fact that Meg Lanning has played about 4 test matches in her career, or in the last 4 or 5 years. There's no test match cricket played. And the ramifications of making those comments to an emerging sport has real significant impact. Like if you criticise what Pat Cummins does today at the cricket, people are still going to go tomorrow. They're still going to watch it. Yeah. But if you are a high-profile journalist and you criticise what Elise Healy did, or one of the Meg Lang's decision, or Daisy Pearce's decision, it has wider ramifications to the sport. Yeah. And I think that's where we need to have this context around the media coverage, but the whole framing around women's sport, I think, is really, really critical.
And the commentary is another one of those areas that you said where it's still mostly male commentators commentating on women's sport. And it is going in the right direction, I think. And
that's where I think it's real. in Melbourne, we've got a player, Libby Birch, who she plays for Melbourne. She just won the premiership, but she writes some really good opinion pieces in The Age. And I think that voices like Libby, who's in the environment, and you know, there's lots of vexing questions in the AFLW that are really hard to solve, like when to play the games, like should they, like if you ask most people, we used to traditionally in the AFL is they had curtain raisers, which were the reserves were played before, and they probably did that with rugby as well. So we don't do that anymore. It's just one, and like so there's this call for like, oh, the AFLW should just be like the curtain raiser to the AFLM game. I was like, well, that's okay. That seems logical, but you know, once again, you're making an assumption that is a secondary competition to that competition. You know,
that's what cricket used to do. They would have the women play, and I always found it problematic that they called it a curtain raiser. And I remember there was a TV ad one of the first 2 or 3 years of the WBBL, which came along after the men's BBL had started, saying, "Come early and watch the women."
Yeah,
you know, so it's and they're. You know, I like to... The WBBL might be my favorite sport at the moment, and Elise Perry is my favorite athlete maybe ever. And I love watching her and her team play. And at that time, if I wanted to see them play, well, I have to pay $40 for a ticket to watch, to quote-unquote watch the men's match, but actually I'm there to watch the women. Yeah. So it's... Yeah, it does create a problem.
But it is really problematic. But then in saying that, when do you play it? So Libby Birch has had some really good stuff about, you know, maybe it's better to have just Melbourne and Hawthorn and Carlton and play the games at the same time. Work out some clear air to do that. You can extend the season out. But these are really difficult questions. Yeah. And there's no great solution. But I think that, once again, getting back to what I was talking about with positionality and doing research in this space, talk to the people that are participating. And this was the biggest problem about the change. They just changed the season in the AFLW, and there was very little to no consultation, and they just said, oh, we're going to do it in August. And it was almost like in February, they just floated it out there as like a thought bubble in a press release. It wasn't even a press release, it was leaked. And then it was like, we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. And it was like 6 or 8 weeks. There was girls that were living in Ireland that had to decide, you know, when they're going to come back.
Right.
We've got other players that are, you know, they have to take annual leave from their jobs to play. So whatever decisions are made, I think it's really clear there needs to be, I know that there's commercial aspects involved, but they need to involve all the stakeholders. Yeah. And I think that's critical.
I couldn't agree more. Well, and netball's had some problems with this, where with a sponsorship issue recently, where the players' values did not align with the perceived values of the sponsor. As well, the addition of the 2-point shot was not run by players.
And I think that this is where, like, being at this sports management conference is a really interesting thing to start looking at, is the way in which the power of athletes is changing, and the athletes are not just these commodities that exist inside this organisation to perform a particular action. And at one extreme, you can see that with someone like Ronaldo, who has got a ginormous Instagram following and made Coke's share price drop when he removed them from a press conference at a major tournament. But even to Pat Cummins not really being happy in Atlanta ads, and looking at the same thing with the netball, and looking at you know, climate change and Indigenous issues around company sponsorship. And I think that this is where these sporting organisations are going to have to start, in all sports, they're going to have to start including the thoughts of the players. But I definitely think, as these emerging sports are coming to fruition, there needs to be consideration to the players and the stakeholders that are involved, I think. And the core fans as well. Like, there's a core group of AFLW fans that are very different to AFLM fans. And there needs to be some consultation with them too. Yeah. Do some enjoy playing at these smaller suburban grounds where there's standing room and seats, no seats, and I always get the feeling when I go to an AFLW game, you might have the same with a BBL game. It's very egalitarian. You just sit where you want to sit. Yeah. It's not too expensive. There's the hill, there's the bleachers. Yeah. Yeah. It's not an onerous thing where you go to some mainstream sport and you end up having to spend all your disposable income, and then you take all day to do it. And so there's a fan aspect as well that needs to be considered. But then on the flip side, playing at these suburban grounds that haven't got proper stands, they affect the product. Like the weather conditions aren't great. So there's complex questions that cannot be solved in an hour podcast.
That's right. Which, on that note, would you believe we've been going over an hour?
Wow.
So probably we'll start. We've mentioned a couple of times that we are here at this man's conference, and you've talked about some presentations that you're interested to see. But what are you hoping to get out of the conference? This is the first one that you're attending in person, right?
Yeah, most definitely. Just to meet people. So really lucky to have it here at Swinburne where I'm working. So just to meet and put a lot of faces to names, as I said, over the last sort of 2.5 years. Met a lot of the fellow HDR students, but also academics in different settings online. So to really make those connections in person and just to keep on building on those sort of networks and see some great presentations and some great sort of always like these conferences where you can get some provocating ideas in which you can come to and you can really say, okay, well, I haven't thought about that. And being SMANS and sports management, there's a vast array of things. Like as I said, I'm very much based around my work around sociology and the social side, but sort of looking at these, organisational perspectives and how different academics tackle different problems or look at different problems and say, okay, well, do I agree with that? Do I not agree with that? And how have they looked at that? And I think that is the best thing about it is creating. And I think SMANS is a great community for that. If you're researching around any sort of sport and society, sports sociology, sports management, sports marketing, it's definitely. And you're in Australia or New Zealand, or even if you're not, if you're in North America or Europe, get involved with SMANS because it's a great community. It leverages off NASM and ESM in North America and Europe as well. So you can, we've had some great sessions together where we've networked with people, and we've got people from North America and from Europe that have come. So it's just a great way to really build a community because I'm very lucky here at Swinburne. Like I'm a part of the Sports Innovation Research Group, so we have I think it's 8 or 9 PhD candidates. But I know a lot of people that do their PhD. It's very isolating. You're not even really in a faculty. You're in a silo where there might only be one person studying sport in your whole school, so you don't have that support around you. So I think that having an industry, disciplinary sort of group like SMANS is a great place that you can foster that community if you don't have it. So I think it's a really important thing to get involved in and can really help. Yeah,
no, I agree. SMANS has been really beneficial to me through the years, and I've enjoyed my involvement, giving presentations, doing the workshop today, as well just all the people that I've met and have been really supportive. You hear horror stories, especially if you spend too much time on academic Twitter, about conferences and people asking questions that are actually aggressive comments and being kind of harmful in that way. But I've only had the opposite here. I've only had people be really encouraging and positive and curious as well about something I'm doing. I'm kind of the first one in the space. And so it's been a lot of introducing what it is to people through the years, but I've appreciated that people have wanted to hear that answer. And that's why I'm here doing these podcast recordings as a first move as well. That I knew this would be a place that I would find people who are keen to come and have a chat and are doing important, impactful work like what you're doing.
Great. No, it's been a blast, and it's a great time to, especially coming out, or not coming out, but as we're progressing in this sort of post-COVID world and having this opportunity to meet in person, I think we all have a new perspective on the valuing it, so really not taking it for granted. So.
Yeah, that's right. What's on the horizon for you? Any publications or other conferences you're looking to attend?
So as I said, so I've got my final sort of panel review, or my 3-year panel review, coming up at the end of February. So everything's on track for that, and then I'm hoping to submit my PhD thesis around middle of next year. So it's definitely just working up a publication schedule. As I said, I've got a couple of other sort of side publications in review at the moment, but really getting this sort of the publication schedule. I've probably got about 4 or 5 publications lined up from my thesis that I'll work on next year. But it's really just sort of working towards getting that thesis done, and then hopefully maybe next man's in Geelong. It might be Dr. Paul, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
The end is always a perilous time.
Yeah, it is. But no, I'm actually really enjoying it. Like, it's sort of being a qualitative researcher. I think it's when you start to tell the story. I always say you start telling the story of what you're trying to say, and it's coming together. It's been a really enjoyable sort of last sort of 3 months of sort of starting to sort of write all the findings chapters and start thinking about the discussion and that. So
yeah. Well, I've enjoyed hearing your story today.
Thank you so much.
But let's put all that aside. The last question I want to ask you is, outside of the PhD and all your travels in academia, what's something in your life that you're excited about right now?
Interesting question. I would say, as I said, I started this journey to become, I never set out to become a doctor, but to become a lecturer, probably 2015. So I think sort of coming to sort of the end of that is you do make a lot of sacrifices. Like, I've probably lived, when I was a chef, I was probably living on between $80,000 and $100,000 a year, and probably the last 8 years I've lived on about $25,000 to $30,000 a year. So just having that opportunity to to work as a sessional academic more, to progress our life together. Like, my wife has been really, really supportive, and like, she's basically supported me for the last sort of 3 or 4 years while she's gone into her work. So sort of progress our life more in that respect. So we've just bought a house, so sort of been able to sort of progress those sort of life goals that you have of, doing some renovations and sort of advancing our life, because it's a big thing. When I think I was 37 when I started this track of a academic life, and it's been challenging. Like, you go from a job where you're like a manager, you're sitting in that sort of power structure, to you're back down at the bottom, and it's sort of like the whole journey, it's been a bit difficult. You're always, especially being a mature age student, you stand out a little bit, and I've only actually found the last couple of years it's actually a benefit. It's like when I've started teaching and that, people just assume because I'm 45 years old that I must have a wealth of experience.
You're just wise.
Yeah. So I think it's just sort of moving on to that next. I think I'm more excited about just moving on to the next phase of my life, and professionally and privately, just all encompassing that sort of new phase of not finishing studying, because I love learning, but sort of taking the learnings or the knowledge that I have and just progressing it in that sort of academic environment, and taking what I can learn, and then, like, most of my life I've just done research or study to fulfill a percentage of a grade to then move on to the next grade. And even like my honours research, like I've had to rework it, and I've got that in to be published, but like I read that, I passed my honours thesis on to a colleague the other day who's thinking of doing their honours, and I read the abstract and I was horrified that I submitted that. But getting to this point now of like, and like I'll probably feel the same when 5 years time I look at my PhD.
Right.
But when you get to the end of a PhD, you're getting to the point where if you're doing it successfully, you should have some substantial ideas that can make a difference. Yeah. And like you had a fantastic workshop today on design thinking, and that's a perfect example of your work that you did in your PhD can be revolutionary if people want to pick it up for how they run their organisation and that. And I think that's the most exciting thing for me is these ideas, these things that are coming out of this work can have some hopefully some positive impacts on people in sport. And I think that's what I'm most sort of excited about. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. That's a fantastic way to end. I think that's a great answer, and I wish you all the best with all of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity to have a chat with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, likewise. And we'll tie a bow on it there. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks a lot for that, Greg.